Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate in economics, is a landmark work that synthesizes decades of research in cognitive and social psychology. The book introduces the revolutionary idea that the human mind is governed by two distinct systems of thought that drive the way we make decisions, judge others, and perceive the world. This dual system theory explains why we often make irrational choices and how our mental shortcuts, heuristics, lead to systematic errors, biases. The two systems of thought. Kahneman divides the mind's cognitive labor into two fictional characters, System 1 and System 2. 1. System 1, the fast thinker. Mode. Operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. Characteristics: intuitive, emotional, impulsive, and works through associations and metaphors. It generates impressions, feelings, and intentions for System 2. Examples: detecting that one object is more distant than another, completing the phrase bread and, driving a car on an empty road, or understanding a simple sentence. 2. System 2, the slow thinker. Mode. Allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it. It is slow, deliberate, and costly in terms of energy. Characteristics: logical, calculating, effortful, conscious, and capable of complex computation. It monitors and checks the suggestions of System 1. Examples: focusing attention in a noisy crowd, filling out a tax form, comparing two washing machines for value, or checking the validity of a complex logical argument. Most of the time, System 1 runs the show, generating impressions that become beliefs and impulses that become voluntary actions. System 2 is generally lazy. It only mobilizes when System 1 encounters a surprise, a problem it cannot solve, or when a decision is particularly important. This laziness of System 2 is central to Kahneman's argument, as it leaves us vulnerable to the errors and biases of the faster, intuitive System 1. Heuristics and biases, the predictable errors. The central part of the book explores the heuristics, mental shortcuts, System 1 uses to make quick judgments, and the cognitive biases, systematic errors that result when these shortcuts are misapplied. A. Availability heuristic and bias. System 1 judges the frequency of an event by the ease with which examples come to mind. Availability. Bias. The availability bias occurs when vivid or emotionally charged events are overestimated. For example, people tend to overestimate the frequency of deaths from dramatic events, like plane crashes, and underestimate deaths from less dramatic ones, like stroke, because the former receive more media coverage and are easier to recall. B. Representativeness heuristic and bias. System 1 judges the probability of an event or person belonging to a category based on how similar or representative it is to the typical image of that category. Bias. This can lead to the conjunction fallacy, where people judge the probability of two events occurring together, a conjunction, as being higher than the probability of one of the events occurring alone. For example, judging that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement is more probable than Linda is a bank teller. Anchoring effect. In many situations, people make estimates by starting from an initial number, the anchor, and adjust insufficiently from it. Bias. The anchoring bias occurs regardless of whether the initial number is relevant to the question. For example, a high initial price set during a negotiation will influence the final agreed-upon price, even if the buyer knows the initial price was arbitrary. The halo effect. The tendency for a positive or negative impression of a person, company, or brand in one area to influence one's judgment of them in other, unrelated areas. This is a manifestation of System 1's drive for coherence. Overconfidence and illusions. Kahneman delves into the various illusions that System 1 creates, which System 2 often fails to correct, leading to overconfidence. 1. Narrative fallacy and coherence. System 1 seeks to create a coherent story from any available information, even if that information is sparse or contradictory. This leads to the narrative fallacy, where we construct flawed, overly simple explanations of the past, making us believe the past was more predictable than it actually was. This reinforces the illusion of understanding. 2. Planning fallacy. This is the tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks of future actions, and at the same time, overestimate the benefits. This bias is caused by focusing too much on the best-case scenario and ignoring the reference class, the outcomes of similar projects. 3. Hindsight bias. The tendency to see past events as having been predictable once they have occurred. This bias gives us an unjustified confidence in our ability to predict the future. Choice, risk, and prospect theory. Kahneman dedicates a significant portion of the book to decision-making under uncertainty, building on his Nobel Prize-winning work with Amos Tversky. Prospect theory. This theory, an alternative to classical expected utility theory, is based on 3 key psychological principles. 1. Reference dependence. Outcomes are perceived as gains or losses relative to a reference point, for example, your current wealth, rather than as absolute final states. 2. Diminishing sensitivity. The subjective difference between a gain of $10 and $20 is greater than the difference between a gain of $1,000 and $1,010. The same is true for losses. 3. Loss aversion. Losses loom larger than gains. The pain of a loss is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This explains why people are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve gains. 4. Framing effect. The way a choice is presented, framed, can drastically change the resulting decision, even if the underlying objective reality is identical. For instance, a medical procedure described as having a 90% survival rate is viewed more favorably than one described as having a 10% mortality rate, illustrating a loss aversion bias that System 2 fails to override. Conclusion. Thinking Fast and Slow is not a book that aims to teach readers how to be purely rational. Instead, Kahneman argues that it's impossible to completely suppress System 1. The key is to recognize the situations in which System 1 is most likely to make mistakes, particularly when high-stakes decisions are being made. The value of the book lies in providing a richer vocabulary to identify, understand, and mitigate these biases in others and in the systems of organizations. While we may not be able to stop ourselves from having intuitive errors, knowing the language of bias and the power of the dual system allows us to spot problems and seek System 2 intervention when it matters most. Summary. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman explores the dual system theory of thought, distinguishing between System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional, and System 2, slow, deliberate, logical. System 1 often leading to irrational choices and reliance on mental shortcuts, heuristics, which can cause systematic errors, biases. Heuristics discussed include availability heuristic and bias, overestimating events based on their vividness in memory, representativeness heuristic and bias, judging probabilities based on typical characteristics leading to the conjunction fallacy, anchoring effect bias, being unduly influenced by an initial reference point in decision-making, halo effect bias, a person's overall impression affecting judgments in unrelated areas. Kahneman examines overconfidence stemming from illusions created by System 1, including narrative fallacy, simplifying the past into coherent stories inaccurately, planning fallacy, underestimating future risks and overestimating benefits, hindsight bias, viewing past events as having been predictable after they occurred. The book discusses prospect theory, which includes concepts of reference dependence, diminishing sensitivity, and loss aversion, explaining how people make decisions under uncertainty. The conclusion emphasizes the importance of recognizing System 1's biases, advocating for awareness and intervention by System 2 in critical decision-making scenarios.